Good afternoon, everybody. Our chairman seems to have been delayed somewhere, so I'm Steve Cole. I've been a past chairman, so I'll just give you a brief intro before we hand over to Stewart. Just some housekeeping rules before we start. If you can mute yourself at the start through the talk, and then we'll open up for questions at the end. If you've got any questions you want to put in on the chat line, then feel free to do that, and Louise will collate those and we'll deal with those at the end. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. We've got Stewart Cameron from Hanson. He's head of nuclear for Hanson and has been involved in the nuclear project there for nearly 5 years. Stewart gave us an update or an introduction into the project about 4 or 5 years ago, and this afternoon's talk is by means of an update, so that we can hear where the project's got. Stewart's been 16 years with Hanson, and before that 12 years with Tarmac, and previous to that with Sandbergs in testing. So he's got a lot of knowledge on technical information. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Stewart. Thank you, Stewart.
Welcome, and thanks for inviting me along. So just a brief agenda, hopefully give you a little update of some of the key numbers of Hinkley and where the project sits at the moment. And I'll touch on a few details as we go through of some of the complications that we face and why, even although it is a large project, why it is such a special large project. And I've got a short video which is only 4 minutes, and it unfortunately doesn't cover the whole site because we're not allowed to share that. Only UDF can share those ones, but hopefully for anybody that is familiar with what a concrete batching plant looks like, you'll get an idea of the scale of what we're trying to control because of the size that we have. So key numbers, firstly, up to the end of August, cement and regen, nearly all of the mixes on Hinkley are 70% regen. We have 2 that are 80% and nothing lower than 70. So very much CO2 orientated. A total so far of just over 5 million tons of aggregate. Some of that has gone into concrete production, but the majority of it, the vast majority at least, is being site earthworks of one kind or another. Marine aggregate, which is all sand, which has entirely gone into concrete production, 443,000 tons so far. We've delivered 150,000 ton approximately for the asphalt, and off-site concrete production from one of our local plants, or well, several of our local plants, I should say, totals 165,000 so far. The on-site plants at Hinkley, we have had several. We had 2 to do the shotcrete, which was for the slope stabilizations around the project. Wasn't a large volume project, but it was quite an interesting and good one. We did just over 50,000 cube through there. Balfour Beatty, which were the marine guys, making the heads and the tunneling segments, 104,000. And then the main civils project, our main contractor, is Bylor, which is a JV of Lang O'Rourke's and Boygues. 869,000 cubic meters to them so far. So project total concrete just over 1 million, and roughly another 580 to 600,000 cubic left to go. So we're about 2/3 or approaching it at least. Just a little bit of detail on the contractors there. Bylor is the main civils construction. They're by far the largest contractor on the project. Keir-Bam's a JV who were responsible for the site earthworks and the infrastructure, and they also constructed the sea defence wall. They are still on site doing multiple little things around site. There's over 48 warehouses to be built. They're doing some, not all. They're still doing a lot of roads. The permanent infrastructures, I don't think we've actually started any of that yet. So we've got a long way to go with that. And then Balfour Beatty on their own are doing the marine package. Originally, that was Costain's, and unfortunately, for reasons not known to me, Costain's couldn't reach a commercial agreement to finish it, so the Balfour Beatty came in and took over. But it's not restricted to that. So far, there's been 40 other smaller contractors working on the project, doing different aspects and elements, and I'm sure that will continue to evolve as the project goes on. So there's, on any given day, we typically have around about 15, 16 different customers that we're delivering to. Focused what's left to go. So as I said, just shy of, or approximately 700,000 cubic, with a current end construction date of, total end construction date of May 27. That doesn't detract from the planned energization of reactor 1, but remember there's 2 reactors here, so reactor 1 will be finished running and powering the grid when we're still finishing elements of the project on site. So I've been asked to make sure when I highlight May 27, I've got to make sure everybody realizes that's not moving this energization dates. It's just that we will not finish the entire project until after that. Roughly another 100,000 tonne of asphalt to go, approximately 500,000 tonne of aggregate left. I suspect that will grow, but that's what we believe at the moment. So I'm going to give you a short 4-minute long video. Hopefully everybody can hear it okay. Basically, it just shows you the jetty and the concrete batching plants, and you can hopefully understand the scale of Hinkley. For anybody that hasn't been or seen, hopefully it'll help you a little bit. So I'll play it now. hopefully that let you all get a bit of an understanding. Sometimes a picture is a million words, so forgive the quality of the video. It was not professionally made. It was one of my staff who does wedding videos, but we thought he did a decent job, so I'm using it. So to move on a little bit to progress, what you see picture to the left, the marine intake heads. This was Balfour Beatty in Avonmouth. They've all now been constructed and they're finished. The steel loadout frames have been mounted recently. There's some press about them last week again, I think. But what you have is 4 large main intakes, and then at the far end you've got 2 small outfalls, mid outfalls, so they're emergency feeds. Originally the program was that they're supposed to get floated out on a barge. Supposed to have been this year, but because of the delays on the dredging in the Bristol Channel, or the disposal, sorry, that's been delayed to starting on being complete hopefully next year. That'll be something, a sight to be seen, to see these being lifted out one at a time, and 2 specialist lift barges will lift them up, lower them to the seabed with an accuracy of 5 millimeters. It's going to be, I've seen the videos, it's extremely intense, and it will be an interesting thing to see. The picture to the right, I just wanted to highlight, you know, major projects, and in my, you know, unfortunately, God, I've got to say this out loud, nearly 30, more than 30 years in the industry, all too often you see contractors placing material with very little care, but at a Hinkley, they have great care. So this is, it's a particular material that we make for them called B5, but it is in essence a very tight enveloped type 1, or it's very like type 1, but the moisture content is so critical to them that every delivery gets passed over the water conveyors. And if you can perhaps just see along the top side of the belts, they've got what is normally dust suppression jets, but these are very large. And every load, every ton that is placed on site actually goes over these belts to make sure that they reach OMC before getting out to site, so that there is no problems with compaction. So it's I've never seen that before. I've seen it done in little places, but never on a large scale like what Hinkley does. Big Carl, which has made loads and loads of press, and rightly so. It's a very unique piece of kit. And for the boys and the toys amongst us, it's you can't help but think it's tremendously impressive. It's the largest classed as mobile crane in the world, and it has a lifting capacity of 5,000 ton at its shortest level and 400 tons at its full outreach, which I should know the measurement, but I don't. But it obviously is quite a long distance. If you look on the left picture, you can see what crudely looks like shipping containers stacked up high, and in essence they are shipping containers stacked up high, with 5,000 tons of my very best type 1 creating that ballast inside it, which will be used at the end of the project for a road somewhere. So it's really hard to understand the capabilities and capacities of such a beast, and it's really, really impressive to see it work. It'll remain at Hinkley until nearly the end. Its primary function is the domes, and as you can see on the right, that's it lifting one of the rings into place. It's nearly always done at night, because there's less staff on site at night. They don't want to stop work, but it obviously makes a very pretty picture, and especially with the lights in the right place. But it's very, very impressive to see. It's crazy. Sorry. So this picture is just to try to give you again an understanding of the scale. This is at Filton, which for those of you that don't know is a disused airstrip in Bristol. And this is the storing of the tunnelling segments that were used in the water system, the cooling inlet and outlet water systems. And that particular slide, we were hitting 90, or they, sorry, let me rephrase, they were hitting 95.7 right first time rate. It's quite, well, I certainly think it's quite impressive to understand the scale of how many segments were made and how they were consumed when you see them like that. Each stack represents one ring that forms a ring inside the TBM. TBM, for those that don't know, tunnel boring machine, picture to the left is the very first one, as it was made in France. Unfortunately, for those of you who don't understand the life of a TBM, in some projects like Thames Tideway, where you're drilling from point A to point B, and then on to point C and point D, you can continue using the TBM, which obviously yields a better value. When you're drilling something like Hinkley that has no return, you're just going out. When you get to the end, you bury it. So the picture on the right is the TBM on the left, buried in concrete, or being buried in concrete, sealing it into its eternal fate at the bottom of the Bristol Channel. And there will be 3 of them. By the end. 2 is now complete, and the 3rd one is just about completed. In fact, I believe it's days away from finishing. So I believe the value of them is circa 10 million each. So sounds like a lot of money, and sounds, well, it is a lot of money. It sounds like wasted money, but there is literally no other way around. Obviously, every component that can be stripped and reused isn't, is. And they do their utmost to minimize anything that is being lost, but that is the nature of tunneling. That's what happens. But most people I speak to don't know what happens to a TBM at the end, so hopefully that hasn't come as too much of a shock for any of you. All too often people discuss only good things in these type of presentations, and one thing that has been seen very positively with our involvement with EDF is our continued openness and honesty. And EDF, in a nuclear world, your honesty is spoken by the number of NCRs you have. And if you have none or very few, then they call you a liar, and they will do it to your face very blatantly. So we very actively try to be open. And one of the, probably the only real issue that we've encountered is these lovely little things that most of you will be familiar with, is catkins. And the effect on catkins on a segment that is not allowed to have anything more than a 3 millimeter blowhole on its surface, which is, as it sounds, absolutely minuscule, is quite devastating when you get these lovely little catkins stuck into your material. Now, I would be selling it short to say that we had 3 weeks of hell to try to work out how on earth this happened. And ultimately, the end result is that we move all of our aggregate from our Watley quarry to Avonmouth by rail. And Network Rail hasn't cleaned the lines, or had not cleaned the lines, in over 20 years. So we stopped running everything by rail for nearly a year when they cleaned up all their embankments and cut back all the trees. And if anybody, some of you might be aware of that happening, some maybe not, but it was one of the biggest cleanups in the West Country lines that has occurred, certainly in a very long time. And it just shows you even the best produced aggregate can be ruined in transit. So big lesson learned for us. And I'm getting very worried because we're coming close back into the season again soon. So hopefully we won't have a repeat. What does quality look like? So far, aggregate samples, 7,375 taken. Concrete, just crossed the 10,000 routine concrete samples. Please bear in mind the testing that we do is purely production and verification for us. So our contractor that we are providing all of these materials to has to test it at a rate 4 times greater than us. Ours is just a check in case something goes wrong, and we've got some information to agree or disagree with them, which, to be fair, never happens. We're always aligned. The bottom two, which to some degree will be a little bit meaningless to you, they're effectively concrete cube strength results graphed out, each one 6F to the left, 6S to the right, which is in simple language, they're both mixed 6S. One is in a slump form and the other is in a flow form. Hence the name's not terribly unique, but there you go, it works. What this represents is the axis to the left is the strength in MPa, and the period starts going right back, the dates at the bottom, 2018 right through to now. So in effect, all off the lion's share of the concrete that's being produced. Now we do make other mixes and there are other graphs, but you'll get very bored if I was to sit and go through all of that with you. So would I, to be fair. But hopefully what I can represent here to you is the consistency. Yes, there's movement, there's seasonal variations, and occasionally there's issues, but as on the vast majority of time, the quality control and the reproducibility of the quarry making the material, cement plants, marine, batching plant staff, and everybody else ends up with a net result of an extremely tightly controlled concrete. And if anybody is concrete minded, the batching plants run at a QSIM of 1.2 to 1.5. Industry norm in the UK is 3.5. 3 would be a really good plant, 3.5 normal, anything up to sort of 6. So hopefully that demonstrates a little bit more about the depth of quality that we're facing. And hopefully I haven't rattled too quickly, but that is me drawing to an end now. So I think Louise will perhaps open up to some questions now, if that's okay. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Stuart. That was, as we expected, quite fascinating, mind-boggling numbers, and certainly the pictures of the site in the night time were quite atmospheric. Yeah, very good. Okay, do we have any questions? You'll need to unmute yourself if you want to speak.
Yeah, hi Stuart. I don't mind starting if that's all right with yourself. With the talk about Sizewell, potentially that coming online in the future years, what were the key learns that you think, going into Sizewell in a decade's time or so that you take forward from Hinkley?
Scale is obviously, scale and consistency of material is probably the biggest learn that you have to be aware of. And my experience through most of my working life, but certainly through nuclear, is that you leave no stone unturned in your pursuit of making sure everybody understands what you're trying to do and not get it right. I mean, to the point that I tend to have more quality conversations with train drivers, watching for people standing on kids standing on bridges throwing bags of rubbish into the wagons, and at least, okay, he can't stop it, I can't stop it, but he can at least let us know you need to check the wagons, and you would not believe what we pull out the wagons, and I know we're not the only people in the world moving aggregate by rail. We nearly all are. But what we found is, because we have to analyze it so intricately at the other end, the stuff literally that we uncover and we remove is huge. So speaking to people in the nuclear world, they call it the nuclear safety culture, and it's about everybody understanding their influence to the end result. And quality is imperative to them, because they don't want anything happening to the material, the aggregate, whether you're talking about backfill, whether you're talking about drainage materials, or you're talking about material that's going into concrete. It's got to be right. So it's something we've embraced and spent a huge amount of time. I run videos, I run talks at every one of our supply chain, including the one in France, which I have to acknowledge I love going to see. In the Alps, but we do that about twice a year to make sure that we continue to engage with the workforce. And I'm sure to many people that sounds bread and butter, but until you end up doing a nuclear project, you don't know what that means. You really don't, because you cannot have something go wrong. You know, we in the early stages of the project, the second year I think we were in, somebody had thought it was okay to put a clay seam through one of the crushers because the material that was coming out the next day was going somewhere else. He didn't realize that it would hold up in a pocket in the crusher, and then small residues of this clay would come through, or dust with high clay content would come through 2, 3, 4 days later. Now, only a 30-ton load got delivered into one of those big aggregate bays, and those are 6,500 ton each. The project made me empty the whole bay just in case. Didn't matter that it was only a 130-ton load. I took whole 6,000 ton off site in 24 hours. We had to replace it. So you're at that magnitude of extreme, so you can't afford it. So my key learn is, you know, the attention to detail is everything. It's the biggest thing. I mean, volume, we've all done big volume projects before, and sustained volume, people, every one of our quarries, even now, still recant to me, you know, do you have any idea how hard it is to get a quarry to run consistently for a long period of time? But that actually wasn't the hard part. And in fact, when you actually sit and you analyze the data, most quarries do run quite statistically consistent. That isn't the issue, although it's not knowing, it's not the issue. It's maintaining the finite quality and the places that could influence that, like Catkins on a you know, a rail line somewhere miles away from you that you just don't have any clue about. So that would be my key.
Oh, fantastic, really interesting. And if you don't mind, I'm going to be greedy and just one more.
Of course.
Kind of on that note, do you think there's a bit of a guilt of over-engineering stuff that, you know, really doesn't need to be over-engineered, you know, access roads and things like that? You know, in terms of taxpayer value, do you think there's a bit of, you know, it's easier just to stay over the top?
I don't know. My experience of nuclear is, and I don't just mean from I certainly don't mean from our point of view, we've no design liability at all, but from an overall perspective, an engineer's calculator always starts, the safety factor always starts at least a 2, if not more, when you're talking nuclear. You know, even if it's just something like, well, what's the safe distance to, you know, how many ropes should I put on this ship to berth it? You always start with a higher factor of safety. And sometimes I would say it's necessary, and a lot of times I would say I don't see a point in it. If it's standard design, then it's standard design. You know, the safety margins that you should apply or do apply should be the same, because the design should have already, you know, it should have already been another 10 millimeters thick, which is, you know, you have a knock on, you end up with a slightly thicker wall, a slightly stronger concrete, a slightly better aggregate, a slightly better cement. And before you know it, you've made something that is, as you say, potentially overkill. So
no, thank you.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, thank you.
No worries.
Anybody with any other questions out there?
Yes, Ian Davis.
Stewart, thank you very much for that very interesting set of facts. May I ask what measures were put in place to combat COVID-19? Obviously, you had a large number of people, lots of contractors coming to site. What measures were put in place to stop the spread? Because that could have been devastating to the progress of this.
Yeah, totally. In my opinion, at least, you have to tip your hat to EDF. I think they did everything following that trend, everything times 2. The overnight we had COVID testing. We have an on-site medical unit which embarked on doing random and at request COVID testing. Obviously, everybody had to put on their masks. Most of the office staff were sent to home working, and a lot of them still are. There's an awful lot of the office people haven't returned, and there is a strong chance they won't. terms of across site, you're not allowed outside an office without gloves on in any case, but there's stations at every potential location where you may remove your gloves, like smoking booths and the canteens and places like that, where there's fluid hand sanitizer. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word there for a moment. There is replacement masks. There's wipes. If you're in a vehicle, you know there's protocol and it's checked. Even if it's your vehicle, they'll still come and check. Any delivery driver has, you know, you're not allowed to go to site without showing a negative test 24 hours beforehand. You're not allowed to be longer. You're not allowed to be less because you can't come. If you don't have a negative, you can't come. If you refuse to do the test, you can't come. So they've policed it, in my opinion, extremely well. They've taken a good view. The only place that you would notably say massive big difference was actually in the canteens, because there's in Hinkley there's 3 big canteens for the workforce. As you would imagine, there's at any given time there's about 4,500 people on site, so that takes a lot of feeding, and they significantly reduced the canteen, put up screens to give everybody isolation. So you went from tables that were in theory 4-seater tables to 2. You could only get 2 in opposite corners with a screen between you. But they worked with the contractors in EDF to split. So lunch breaks went from a 3-hour period to a 5-hour period. You know, they logically they realized you couldn't do the same. The math didn't work. So you had to give people different start times, different finish times, vary the work patterns as much as possible to try to spread out what would be your lunch break, make sure they're right different times. So arguably no more than what anybody else did, but they made absolutely certain they did it all. You know, with thermal cameras, when you come to the security towers in the morning, thermal camera would check you. If you showed any sign of temperature, you were pulled to the side, you were tested, you were checked, you removed from the site if necessary. They also very positively enforced all contractors to pay all staff, which for most of the contractors are self-employed, or at least the workforce, coal-face workforce, where a lot of them were self-employed. EDF said, no, you can't not pay these guys. Even if they're COVID or COVID isolation, you must pay them. We don't want to discourage anybody from being open and honest and sharing, and you shouldn't be penalised from having it. So the only way we're going to get ultimate transparency is by everybody being in the same boat. And they believe that's what's kept them so successful. They've had a couple of little isolated outbreaks, but on the scale, you know, we all expected, oh, here we go, you know, this is going to be a few weeks and we're going to have 1,000 people off site, and we've not, you know, touch wood, we've never had it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
We've got Peter Williamson with his hands up.
Good, long time.
Hey mate, how you doing?
Good, pretty good. You mentioned about people continuing to work from home. I suppose that surprises me, given the security nature of the information you're dealing with, design information and things like that. But also in terms of how the sort of dynamic within your team, how through COVID and then subsequently, how's that working? How are people working together with some on site and some at home?
I think like most companies, we've become experts in Teams. It's gone from something that we used to have a large-scale conference call once in a blue moon to, you know, we're slaves. We don't, you know, we don't get off Teams these days. In fact, the biggest topic within, not necessarily one site at Hinkley, but certainly within Hanson is how are we going to get off Teams so that we can get back to visible felt leadership? So how do we get back in to see the staff? And it's a really hot topic at the moment, because as much as we want to get back, whenever somebody goes back, we get a blooming COVID outbreak or a flu outbreak, which seems to be the thing at the moment. Well, not paralyzing, but certainly we've had more than our fair share of quite nasty flus in the last few weeks, which is scary because, of course, they mask themselves. You think that's COVID and they never test them. But a lot of it has been use of technology, using Teams, looking at what work can be isolated, what can be done at home. Meetings, rather than traveling from one side of site to the other, to I'll sit in a meeting room, can you do it on a remote call? Can that suffice? And there are times where you just have to get close together, and so there's things, especially on Hinkley, they've created a lot more meeting rooms, so they put up some tents so that you could actually have an outside meeting, even if it's not such a nice day. And okay, it doesn't answer everything. You're not going to sit there and have an intricate private conversation with somebody in an open tent, but when it's just the daily progress and you want 10 people around the table, it's fine, it works. So it's very task specific solutions, but it's a question of having an open mind too. There is multiple solutions that do what you need to do.
Thanks, Stuart.
No problem.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, following on really from both of those, Stuart, do you think that COVID and that method of working has impacted on the project, or have they been able to keep it tight and keep everything on programme regardless?
No, I think I would argue probably, sorry, not argue, but I would say, I think it was about 7-8 months ago that Stewart, who is the project managing director from EDF, went public on the news and said that they'd certainly seen at least a 6-month delay, potentially could be longer, and that was 6 months at that point in time. What it's mostly done is they've significantly reduced workforce on site, partially through COVID, in terms of offices. They've tried to maintain the full workforce in the sort of site itself, but they've suffered badly in the last 4 to 6 months. I don't think this is a public number, if I'm being honest, but somewhere in the region of 2,000 staff they've lost in the last 8 weeks. To majority of it has been to HS2. But there are an element, and they don't know that element, because obviously not everybody tells you the truth when they're leaving you, but some people have said, look, COVID's put me off. I don't want to be living away from home any longer. I'm going home. Sorry, thanks, but I'm going to take a job on less money. I'm going home. Now, some people have been transparent and told you that. What it's done to what the net result of all of that is that Reactor 1 has stayed on plan, and they're absolutely, you can see it coming out the woodwork. They're focused to make sure that Reactor 1 does not miss program, gets energized on the day they told the government it would be done. It's going to happen. And at this moment in time, I see no reason to disbelieve that. Reactor 2, we're hardly touching. So what you'll see is Reactor 1, my belief at least at this point, is Reactor 1 will come online on time, but Reactor 2 is slipping. It's supposed to be a year behind in plan. I would imagine that somewhere soon we will hear that it's 18 months, 2 years would be my, it's purely a gut view. It's not in it. I don't see documents telling me things like that. So please don't quote me on it, but it's my best estimate. I think you'll see a big slippage on Reactor 2.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Just to finish off. No, okay, well, thank you very much for that, Stuart. Fascinating as always. We've had this talk a couple of times now, thinking it never fails to amaze me, just the pure scale of the project. I'm sure everyone around the virtual room echoes that. Certainly seeing that image of the tunnel segments on Filton runway, I wondered what they were when I've seen them from a distance. So thanks for clarifying that one. Very impressive and gives you a real idea of the scale.
Yeah.
And I think finally your comment there about getting away from Teams, I think that's probably echoed across the industry. So it's not just Hanson, if that gives you any comfort. But really just say thank you. A virtual round of applause for Stuart for giving up his time today. Very grateful to have you here. So.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a nice evening. Thanks once again for joining us.